Hey everybody, Randy Patterson here with Boomerocity, and I've got a very unique interview for you this time. It is with Anthony DiMaria. He co-wrote, along with our good friend Marshall Terrill, uh, an amazing book entitled Jay Sebring, Cutting to the Truth. Anthony is Jay Sebring's nephew. Jay was murdered along with Sharon Tate and others during those horrific Manson murders that took place back in August of 1969. There was so much more to that story that I didn't realize until I watched the documentary by the same title as this book. And then now, and that documentary came out 5 years ago, and now there's a brand new book by the same title, as I said, written by Anthony and our good friend Marshall, that goes into a lot more depth about Jay's story, his life, his amazing career, which, by the way, he's credited for giving birth to the men's hairstyle industry, because up to that point, and we're talking back in the 60s now, so keep that in mind when I quote these dollar amounts, a man would go in to get a haircut and expect to pay about $1.50 and come out with quite frankly, a crappy haircut usually. But Jay changed all that. He started styling, he started creating custom cuts that were designed for the shape of the person's head and face, and creating all new looks for these people. And he's credited for single-handedly giving the hair image, at least, for Steve McQueen and for Bruce Lee and for Jim Morrison. Remember that famous long-haired look of Jim Morrison's that started at the beginning, before the Doors launched big time? That was Jay Sebring's work. And there is so much to his life. And there's a lot of new detail that Anthony and Marshall give about the horrific murders. But we really want to focus more on the life of Jay, because there was so much I didn't know. And I also learned a lot about our media and how they just slimed the victims of those horrific murders that happened and committed by the Manson family, quote unquote family. So while you're watching this or listening to it, would you please hit like? And would you also subscribe to Boomerocity if you're not already a subscriber? I won't charge you anything for it, but it sure helps us out a lot, and it just helps us stay in touch with you. So without any further ado, here is my first of what I hope are many more interviews to come with Anthony DiMaria. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care.
Okay, now I can hear you.
Okay, good deal. I had to make sure I wasn't on mute. Now, I had a disaster a couple of weeks ago. I was interviewing Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top, and Zoom totally hosed me up, man. I mean, we hardly could hear. I mean, I might have gotten 5 minutes worth of stuff. I don't know yet. I was so disgusted. I haven't even gone back to look at it yet, but we both had to give up on it. So I'm glad we're working today. So
yes. Yeah. Billy Gibbons and I, just off record, we're not, I mean, you can record.
I can edit out everything that you want me to. So speak freely.
All right. Thanks, Randy. So Billy Gibbons, I did an episode of Deadwood, and so it was the very last episode of the third season, and he and Dusty Baker were there. Some guys from Anthrax, and I forget the other guy. Anyway, they were all there, and they were like, I don't know if they were extras, but they didn't have any, but they were there, as characters and everything. And Billy Gibbons was staying at the hotel. It was at the Hyatt in Santa Clarita, because I was in from out of state, and I'm guessing he was. But we struck up conversations, and Billy Gibbons was such a generous, great guy. And so many of the guys on the set of Deadwood, we're talking like serious wranglers, like former racers and all kinds of stuff. These guys were from Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Texas. And my character was kind of a lunatic. And so some of the guys were amused by that. So they called me the Monkey Man, because I was doing some crazy stuff in it, and I was making monkey noises. So we had lunch one day, and I didn't realize, but one of the wranglers, one of the guys goes, "Hey, Andy." He goes, "Hey, man." He goes, "When you get done with lunch, you got to come out under the tree, man." He goes, "Billy Gibbons, ZZ Top, Dusty Baker, they're going to play our guitars, man." So sure enough, Billy and Dusty are out there, and you got about 20 wranglers And a lot of these guys are musicians, and they're sitting there, and hey man, you play my guitar? So Billy goes, yeah, man. And he starts going, and he goes, hey man, you got to tune this thing, man. And then some of the guys are like, and some of the guys are like, hey, can you sign my guitar? Can you play my guitar? And they were doing this impromptu performance. It was on Thursday and Friday that they were there. And so anyway, I was done that week, and the Friday the bar was packed, and we had dinner on the Thursday, which it was empty, but now it was the weekend. So Billy Gibbons goes walking by, and he had that hat on. He used to wear these African hats, and he gave me a card of it, and there's a great story behind that. So he was walking, and I heard some guy say, "Hey man, that's ZZ Top," but it was just Billy. So I looked at him, and oh wow! So I had to go have dinner. So I signed out my check because I was going to get showered and before I went out. Mm-hmm. And then I looked up after I signed up. All of a sudden, Billy comes walking over, and he says, "Hey man, what you doing?" I said, "Billy, I got dinner. I just had a round, but I got to tell you something, man." I said, "Take my seat." I said, "But I've been a fan of you my whole life as an artist, as a rock and roller." And I said, when I watched what you did on the set today at Deadwood, and how generous and how cool you were. And I mean, everybody was talking about you guys, and there's some serious actors on this set. Mm-hmm. And I said, I got to tell you now, after watching you play people's guitars and talk with people and sing, I said, I'm just as much a fan of you as a musician and a rock star, but as a man. And he looked at me, and he was so humble, and he goes, well, oh man, well, takes one to know one. And he was so cool, man.
It's funny you're sharing all this, Anthony, and I'm going to leave this in our piece because I think people tune in for the music, but I want them to hear this, even though we're going to be talking about your uncle. But I opened up my interview telling him the same thing. I don't know if he got to hear it all or not, but I said, man, I got to brag on you for 3 reasons. I said, the first time I saw you in person was at Stevie Ray Vaughan's funeral.
Wow, yeah.
And I said, the fact that you and Dusty and Frank showed up was huge. I mean, it spoke a lot to me. I know it had to speak to Jimmy and the family and all that. And I think he was might have been a little questioning if I was telling the truth. I said, yeah, man, my little daughter and I walked up when Jackson Browne, Bonnie Raitt, and Stevie Wonder were singing Amazing Grace a cappella. And it's like, yeah, all right, I was there, So I said, the second thing I want to brag on you about is how you have made Elwood feel as if, from the crowd, it looks like you're just making Elwood feel like he's been there all along, as a player, not as a tech. And I said, that's class, man. I said, making him feel that easy. I said, and thirdly, the first time I saw you in concert was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I said, this kid and his friend were sitting in front of me and my brother-in-law. We were there to see the show. And they were just excited to be there. They were giddy. It was kind of getting on my nerves a little bit. It's like, calm down, boys. This is a concert, And they turned to us. They said, they got their popcorn, they got their Cokes, and he's saying, man, I can't wait to see this. He goes, believe it or not, I ran into Billy at a bar last night, and I went up to him and asked him for his autograph, and he gave it to me. And he said, I told him, Billy, believe it or not, me and my dad would listen to ZZ Top all the time. And he's not going to believe I got to meet you. And he goes, well, are you going to the show? And he goes, no, I couldn't get tickets. He goes, hold on. Takes his cell phone, makes a call. He goes, you have tickets waiting for you tomorrow night. And I just thought, you know what? Musician or not, that's class,
Oh, so. Class and humble. And he's aware of how what his status is as an icon and as a rocker and as an artist, but equally so, he's a very humble man. I was massively impressed. But also was interesting is when they were under that tree, and like I said, there was like 30 or 40, no, not 40. It was closer to like 20 or 30 Wranglers and Cowboys, and these guys were the real deal too. And they were playing acoustically, and so they were both playing. And then at one point, I don't remember. I think it was Dusty that was using the guitar as like a bait, like a drum. He'd slap it, and then ha 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 ha. And it was like, it was, it was in its own way even better than the recording. I mean, it wasn't better. It was just shocking how damn good it was under a tree with no acoustics, no good drums, no nothing, just these two men singing this massive classic, and it was really inspiring. Yeah, I'm glad
Wow.
you shared that with me because and if you see him, let him know, you know. But he was phenomenal on the Deadwood
Yeah.
set.
Class act all the way, and some of the best rock and roll I've heard live ever. I saw him last year with Leonard Skinner, and wow, it was better than even seeing him in Chattanooga. So it was I'd see him anytime I get a chance,
Yeah.
anytime. So where are you clicking in from, by the way?
I'm in West Hollywood, so
Oh, okay.
I spent a lot of time. I'm born and raised in Vegas, but I split my time between Las Vegas and West Hollywood.
Well, man, I'm glad Marshall has gotten us together. Marshall's a great guy, and I can't think of anybody better for you to have worked with on this than him. He is phenomenal. I've known him a few years, and it was all rock and roll that brought us together because of
Mhm.
Ken Mansfield that was with Capitol Records and had a lot to do with the Beatles and all that. And Ken's passed now, but through him, Marshall and I met, and we've became friends very quickly. And I'm a huge fan of his, and I interview him every chance I get for his work. And he put us together, and I'm very grateful for it, man. As I told you in my email last night, I learned a lot. You know, I always think I know more than I do, you know, and I certainly thought this about, you know, the tragedy of the Manson murders and all that, but once I started cracking the book, and then I kind of used the documentary as my cliff notes to get me going and kind of set my mind in the right frame before I started the book. And like I told you last night, man, you did a phenomenal job, I feel, in honoring the memory of your uncle and clearing the name. I mean, to me, there should be penalties paid for what was said and done about, you know, your uncle, Sharon Tate, you know, everybody. And I think you do a very good job of level setting things. I don't know if you'll ever be able to get his name totally cleared because not everybody's going to be able to see what you've done to clear it. But I think if anybody could have accomplished it, it was you, and you did an amazing job in striving towards that goal. So I
Well, Randy, I really appreciate everything you're saying, and you've said so much that in a great way that I want to make sure I can address them. And first and foremost, you know, I'm grateful that Marshall put us together. And as you had said, and you realize, I mean, it was so easy to work with this man. It was effortless. And you know, when you do film production or acting or producing, collaboration is imperative. And unfortunately, a lot of people are very temperamental. They have huge egos. But working with Marshall was not just a godsend, but it was just effortless. And the guy's,
Mhm.
not only is he talented, he's a genuine historian and he's
Mhm.
a talented writer. So there was all those aspects to it. And just a little bit of background on him. I was, you know, with the documentary, and by the way, with the documentary, I was so fortunate because people weren't really respond. That had to be truly an independently produced film, and for reasons I can't believe. Because if you look at Jay Sebring's story, which if we can come back to that, why it's so relevant, universally and even dramatically, how in the hell has someone not told his story before? So at this time, people really didn't know who Jay was, other than being one of the victims or one of the four others. So I embarked on a journey that was decades. And at first, my life, from early on in my life, I just wanted to know who he was. And I wanted to see him again from the moment my mother told me I could never see him again. And that was just indelible to me. And that was the catalyst that really started of all of this. So, and on the years of researching, I started seeing things like red flags. And I was like, wait, you know, so it became a journey to know the truth, whether I liked it or not. And then I saw the red flags, and I saw two different Jay Sebrings, a man who lived and a man portrayed as a victim, a decadent victim, as he lied defenseless in his grave. And the two seem like completely polar opposites. Now, some people might say, well, that was wishful thinking, but it wasn't wishful thinking. Because if half the things, if even a fraction of the things were true that was written about Jay after he was killed, I might not have even done the documentary or written a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was the opposite. So I engaged on these endeavors and this mission to tell Jay's story because it hadn't been told, and the historical record to set that straight because it had been so, not just Jay and his legacy, but a historical event had become so exploited and not known for in its human dimension and in its facts. So I reached out and I started to do a doc, and it was very difficult. It was difficult to find resources, but I encountered some people who were warriors in this that also were extraordinarily talented. And that was Johnny Bishop. He was a producer, editor, cinematographer. Chad Lane, phenomenal. He happens to actually be a dear family friend as well from, we were Vegas guys. Great producer. Jeff Beal, the composer, was extraordinary, and all the crew. So, and so much, and I bring this up because so much of what we all did together is through so much adversity. If you watch the doc, you can see that we probably had about 10 different cameras that we rented, begged, borrowed, or stole. You know what I mean? We burned one camera and couldn't afford another one. So and we burned through it. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'm so grateful to all of them for what they did. And then Marshall, I was like, okay, there's a different chapter to Jay's life story, right? There's his roots, Korea. He goes to Hollywood, the hair, all the different things that he does. And then there's chapters of in his life like Bruce Lee and Steve McQueen. So Linda Lee, Bruce's wife, she was extraordinary. She did an interview, and I had a ton of material, handwritten letters from Bruce to Jay. And so I had a lot of resources there. So then I had the Steve McQueen chapter, and as the book will reveal and the documentary, and they were very good friends. In fact, Steve said on his deathbed that Jay Sebring was my best friend, which is a very interesting thing at a time when everybody wanted to be a part of Steve's scene. They wanted to be his best friend, but who did Steve McQueen want to be best friends with? Jay Sebring. And these were some of the things that were the big surprises or illuminating, revelatory things. And that was, Jay was not interesting because he was a celebrity hairstylist. He was the star among the stars. And that's just an example. And so this book really gets into that. So I wanted to speak to any of Neil or Chad McQueen. And it was difficult. I mean, I was getting attorneys and questions and this and that. And I was like, this doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. And it was taking sometimes like a year or two. I thought, who can I talk to who knows Steve McQueen, an insider, like a best friend and I did research, and that's what led me to Marshall. And so when I contacted,
he's written
Marshall,
a book or two about Steve.
Yeah, probably about a book or six on Steve.
Yeah, exactly.
And he knows every angle on Steve. You know what I mean? And
that's right.
So when we spoke, I found him to be very friendly, very solid and everything. And I said, hey, I'd like to interview you for the documentary for the Steve McQueen segment. He says, Anthony, I don't know if I can say this, but he had a film deal, or maybe still, I don't know where it's at, but and he says it's a conflict of interest, so I can't do the interview. But in my research on Steve, I've learned so much about Jay that he's just as interesting, if not possibly a little more in that. And that's how I remember that. Marshall will tell you exactly how, but then Steve, because of the dynamic of coming and he said, so if you want to do a book, I'll do a book with you. And I said, well, like you, I have a conflict. I have to finish the documentary. Once that film is released, I'd love to do a book. Well, hell, I didn't realize that it was going to take 15 years to get the film done. And then I was like, so Marshall and I kept in touch. We shared information with each other, and we became not only just, not sharing information, but we became really solid friends. And I have to say, I couldn't have had a better collaborator and writer to work with. He's phenomenal. And it was, again, effortless to work with him.
Well, what I've noticed about Marshall, we're going to sound like we have a man crush on Marshall. His head's going to get so big.
He's
And
already
I'm
got
joking, of
he's
course.
got a big head already, man. I mean,
And we're leaving this in this piece. When he sees it, he'll hear us in
well, I'm
our
not
own
talking
voice.
about metaphorically. I'm talking about literally, just a huge noggin, man. No, I'm joking. No, he's
Well,
not big.
he just what I love about him is each time there's been, he will point to the co-author to be interviewed rather than himself more times than not. And honestly, the first time I interviewed him was over the book on Elvis and the Colonel.
Hmm.
And that's where he and I really got to be good friends. We'd been connected through Facebook, but I saw on Facebook that he was announcing this book coming up about Elvis and the Colonel. And I shot him a note. I said, "Hey, I'd like to interview you for this book." He goes, "Before we get there," he goes, "tell me, what was your opinion of the Elvis movie?" I said, "Oh, that's easy." And I sent him a link to the review I did on it. And in that review, which was written, a year or so before the book came out, I said I didn't like how Tom Hanks portrayed the Colonel. I felt like it was inaccurate, and that in essence that he didn't fulfill a deal he made with the Colonel's widow, that he would portray him accurately. And so I said I said that was wrong. I said there's a lot right with that movie, but I think they made the Colonel look like a buffoon. Now, like him or not, that's a whole nother matter, but they made him look goofy, and he was anything but that. He goes, Marshall wrote back and goes, "You got it." So we just started. He sent me an advanced review, a PDF of the book before it came out and all this stuff. I was supposed to interview Greg right after the book came out. That's when they diagnosed him with stage 4 cancer, and he passed before the end of the year. So Marshall stepped in, and that's how we, got to rolling. And but he's not a limelight hogger at all. So, and I see his fingerprints all over this book, man. So it's I could probably I don't know your writing style at all, but I know his, and so I'm going, that's a Marshall there, but
Well, it's funny
but
you say that because it's important when you're doing something. Now, again, I did a book before this. It was a Bruce Lee, the Jay Sebring connection, and I co-authored it with David Tadman and Steve Carriage, I think. But what's interesting about Marshall, we had Scott Sikel, and they were starting to write it, and I think initially they thought that I was going to be kind of like the source and the story overall. And sadly, Scott passed, and so things kind of very early on before we really started getting into it. So Marshall would start to write some things, and he goes, "Hey, I want you to take a look at this. Does that seem right?" And we would do the prep beforehand, and he would do his thing. And it was great. And I said, "Yeah," and maybe if there was a correction or this. And then he says, "Hey, I don't know really anything about this transition. Or any way you can just do that transition, just and then I'll clean it up." I see, "Yeah, okay, great." So that's what we did. And he goes, I don't know, man. I don't think I. So then he was like, "Hey, how about I'll do the first half of this chapter, and you do the rest of it." I said, "Okay, great." And he was doing things, and then he's like, "Okay, well, about the Bruce Lee stuff, and you take Bruce, I'll take Steve." I said, "Okay, great." But in doing what we were doing, I had to, and again, this is what's really helpful when you've done film production as an actor. You read a script, and you have to be respectful to the style of the script, the writing, the director, even if they're not a good director. If someone gives you stupid direction, if they say, "Hey, you got to be funny on this," or "You got to say that faster," that is completely useless material, direction. So as an actor, you got to say, "What the hell is he trying to get at? Like, what the
Mhm.
hell?" So you translate it, and then you do what you got to do. And that's so. In other words, what I'm saying is, you have to realize your place in collaboration, and that is so. The book in the beginning, all I did was express what I knew and whatever insight, but I tried to remain true to Marshall's style. So there was a tremendous amount of respect for what Marshall was doing, but I also realized that that's what's going to make this seamless and easier to work with. You know what I'm saying? And what was great too is, like you said, I mean, just humble, no ego. I would say, this
Mhm.
wasn't quite right, or blah blah blah, and And we would go back and forth on different things, and it was always easy because we always went back to what is the point of the story, what is the
Right.
truth, and that's what our effort was, and that was the touchstone. And he's got the talent and the humility, but also the confidence to be able to do that. And dare I say, that's what he was doing was giving me plenty to work with to kind of go along that style of writing that Marshall has.
Were in putting the book together, did you, I mean, the way you did the documentary, I loved how you brought in, the various, actors, actresses, being on scene and all that. Was any of that revisited for the book, or was it basically saying, all right, the movie had this part, great, let's integrate that into the book, and then we don't need to go and talk to Dennis Hopper again, or whoever the case may be. How did that all work out?
Well, in some cases, yes. Like I said, there was some things that were in the doc that we included. There was like that. There was also additional. Some people had passed away, so we couldn't follow up with an interview with them. Other times, I would have conversations with people on the phone, or that, so that they would share things that happened with Jay or what have you. So then I could include that in the book as well. So there was a lot from the doc, but there also was a lot in my correspondences with some of these people. And again, it really was extraordinary, the love and respect that so many people from the doc shared for Jay. People that, like, and it was interesting too, some people who were very standoffish and did not do interviews and didn't even respond. Warren Beatty's in the doc. I mean, I'm just saying what was. And I saw him at the Chateau Marmont and we talked, and very nice. And I thought he was going to do an interview, and I reached out, never heard from him. Vincent Bugliosi, you would have thought that guy who had made millions on a book, I went for decades trying to get in touch with him, and he declined. Now, but then there was people like Nancy Sinatra, Dennis Hopper, Quincy Jones. I mean, people that just like so Vito Sassoon, everybody in the film, that with such love that. And these were people that inspired me as an artist and historical figures. Mm-hmm. And then when I'm sitting in the room with them and I see them tear up and get emotional, and also how in some cases they looked up to him. Again, that was a very revealing thing. Jay was the magnet. He was the star among the stars, not just with the great haircut, but how you express yourself. What is the ultimate Hollywood cool, or just coolness,
Yeah.
So I was very touched and moved by that. Then there was people like Jay Sebring and Joe Torrenueva. And I mean, there was just so many people that really, and of course my family. And, so it really was an extraordinary journey and really an honor. But also then there was people like Pat Boone that we interviewed. Then former LAPD commander, Joseph Gunn. Where there was people who really had some additional information about Jay's story, and also maybe some forensics on some of the things that were talked about after the murders. So you had people who knew Jay, and in this case, Pat Boone really was responsible for Sharon Tate's very first film credit, if you'd say, but that's first. And he shares a great story about that. And the book, and it was just, and I've gotten fortunately to know Pat over the years, and he, again, another great iconic man. And for these people, they wanted to tell the story, and they wanted to be a part of it. So as you said, it's been so encompassing with my need to know everything about Jay, but also when I see these red flags, as I put it, to tell the story. And then Marshall, of course, in his own way, his commitment, he would say, hey, this and that. He goes, I know this person over here who did this and knew Jim Morrison, or whatever. And so we were both kind of reaching out and doing our own interviews where we felt needed to address, either what has happened since the documentary, and also even some of these parole hearings and some of the legislation that is impacting the parole hearings. So it's been quite expansive, and it also addressing some of the newer narratives that are being promulgated and exploited, whether it be in books or TV and film. I mean, and that was something. So that necessitated additional interviews, and so this book is quite expansive on a forensic.
It is. Yeah, I mean, well, even in the documentary, you had Bodden in there and talking about his view of certain things, and what I think is sad, and it points back to what I said at the beginning of this call. From the outside looking in, I'm just John Q. Public here, and like millions of others, it was all right. Yeah, there's Sharon Tate. She was married to Roman Polanski. She was pregnant. Then there's these others that were killed, and yeah, their names were mentioned, but who does the public always think of? It's Sharon Tate and Charlie Manson and the family. And I even hate mentioning his name because I feel like he's gotten way more attention and adoration, sickly enough, than the man ever deserved. And I don't even like calling him a man; it's abuse of the word. But it's we as human beings we have to remember there were other humans that were taken in that, and instead of compassion being shown, what did the press do? What did Bugliosi do? I mean, they were vultures circling around the story and maligning people who couldn't defend themselves, just as much as they couldn't defend themselves against the murderers. And that's the big thing that opened my eyes in the documentary and the book, Anthony, was that. I mean, in fact, I felt kind of shamed as an observer, that even as an observer, I didn't think to look beyond certain things, because the attention, the shiny stuff was, we were being shown, was commanding all the attention. And I mean, it's almost like I wish the families of the other people who were murdered would also do a book on that, about their members, because, and if they could use yours as a guideline, wow, maybe this thing would turn around. But the things, and obviously we have to touch on the murders, but I jotted down four things about Jay that you brought out very well.
Well,
That
Mark, wait,
Go
can I just want to go to a couple things because I would like to, I don't want to forget the trend of thought. And I think you make so many great points and there's so many, so you had mentioned Dr. Michael Bodden. So he was in
Mhm.
the documentary, but he was one of those people as things came up that he would be kind and generous enough to just like, I could reach out to him. He's such a good man. And I think he knows how important the truth and justice is. So sometimes there was a follow up with that. And then when you mentioned all the other victim stories, I 1,000,000% agree with that. And I tried to do it with the documentary, but Jay's story was so dense and pregnant, if you will, that we were going to do, like, if we could have done a 6-episode season, which we could, with all the footage that we have from that doc. I mean, we have over 80 people interviewed, 200 hours of footage. And,
Golly.
we would have done a whole episode on every one of the victims, and they deserve that. And then Marshall and I talked about it again. And this book is 500 and I don't know, 60 some odd pages.
Yeah.
Again, so we really wanted to do a chapter on all the victims, but Jay's story was too expansive and we just couldn't do it. So those were some of the things that were very difficult for us because we held them in the same regard or a very similar regard. You know what I mean? As Jay's legacy, they each should have their stories be known and told.
Mhm.
And yet, in some cases, to varying degrees, they've been sullied and vilified.
Yeah.
And I look forward to anybody who does a project on that. I will be 100% provider or tech, just support because I believe in each one of the victims and their families with the
Yep.
same type of regard. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And one irony too is what you had said. Jay was William Friedkin saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and he used to come to the shop at Joe Torrenueva's shop, and we became friends, Billy Friedkin and I, and he's family friends with Joe. And before he passed, he said, Anthony, I want to know what would you think of that movie? What'd you think of your uncle in that movie? And we shared what we shared. And he goes, I'm going to tell you something. Jay Sebring was one of the most powerful men on the planet. But in the very elite circles, everyone knew who Jay was and what he was doing and what he was. They all wanted a part of that. He could make things happen for their careers, as he did with Bruce Lee, changing as he did, and we can get into some of those things with Jim Morrison. He was a game changer, not just in a haircut, but in lifestyle and in connections and in politics. I mean, he was the sensate Rog of one of the most exclusive establishments on the planet. Because you have Jess Unruh, California, one of the most powerful congressional Democrats in California. You've got Sinatra, Brando, Freddie Fields. You got so many powerful people, and they were all going to Jay, and Jay was the one who would make. And so, Billy Friedkin really got it, or William Friedkin, and he said, and people don't realize. And one of the critics, and this is no disparagement on Sharon, none, because she was extraordinarily beautiful and inside and out, and really did some great work, and I think was just on the verge of getting into possibly comedy acting, because a woman that beautiful who could be comedic that's gold mine right there.
Yeah.
And so she was just she was, I think, just. But one of the reviewers said, in seeing Jay's story, in this particular case it was the documentary, they said that clearly, if you see the power and influence that Mr. Sebring did in his business and his personal life, that one would say that the tagline, if you could say that, but that's what they said, was that it was the Sebring murders. And I'm only saying this because of what was really going on in terms of Jay's influence in his own industry, in politics, in Hollywood, and as we'll see in the book, throughout the world. And so it's a very interesting thing. It's not a comparison thing, it's a contextual thing. So right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get it, but you said you wanted to ask a couple of questions.
Well, no, I was just I kind of boiled things down about Jay to 4 bullet points, because clearly in the book, and in your film, I you made very clear you want people to hear the story about Jay and not just about the murders. And so I want, I'm approaching our talk today from that standpoint. Obviously, we have to touch on the murders a little bit, but I have the bulk of it about his story. And the 4 points I jotted down that I gleaned from your telling of his life is, traits of his was that, his creativity, his forward thinking, his business acumen, and his impact not only on film, but in music. And, some of the people, obviously the music piece gets my attention even more than the film side of it, but I was stunned about how his impact with Morrison and that type of thing. So, you're in the arts, on the creativity side of things. Do you feel that his creativity is a family trait? I mean, your mom was did hair, and you're in acting. I don't know about the rest of your family members, but is that something you feel at family reunions? You say, yeah, man, we've got this creative gene, in us or whatever. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's
how he got it.
I think that that's a great point. And again, it's covered in the book, but ironically speaking, our entire family is something to do with my parents have a salon. They met in beauty school, and my mother was the youngest of 4. Jay was her oldest brother, and she's extraordinarily talented. And she and my father are extremely talented and successful in business and in the doing of hair, and both my sisters as well. So and they're all extraordinary at what they do, but it extends beyond the field of hair. And so now we'll go into some context of Jay's roots, which are some really things that are illuminated in the book. And the irony is that his grandfather, from his mother's side, was a coal miner. And we go, again, this is just the Cliff Notes version, but he was a coal miner and got black lung So he couldn't work anymore. So he became a barber for whatever reason, and that's what he would do to make money. Now, was there that influence on Jay? I don't know. Um, but also his his grandmother on his father's side, who was a German, she had German ancestry, and his grandfather was an immigrant from Germany. He was a tailor, and his grandmother was a porcelain china artist, and she was an apprentice, an assistant to George Lakoff, a very famous world. He did all china. If you look him up, his porcelain china is extraordinary. And she was, I don't know if she was equally talented, but she was. And we still have all her thing. So art, creativity, there's no doubt is somehow in the genetics of Jay Sebring and of our family on different levels. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So I
I
think
believe in that.
I love the question that you asked that, because you're looking a little bit deeper into things than I guess some people would.
Well, I mean, it's. Sometimes I read between the lines too far and come up to a wrong conclusion. So but we're to see that and talking about your mom, I've got to ask, has this book and documentary been cathartic for her? Because I mean, it's clear in the documentary she loved her brother, misses her brother, and I hope that these efforts are bringing some healing for her that maybe hadn't been able to happen for a lot of years. Has that been the case?
I think so. Yeah. I think when you're dealing with such tragic family crimes and loss, no matter what, there's no way until Jay gets up out of his grave and spends the last 56 years that he should have with us, and we all shared that and lived with each other as a family and all his friends, it's still going to be devastating. So
Yeah.
in some cases, like there was times when I would, because really my parents they're just very insightful, not only to our family history, but in the business and different things. So I would run things by them. And it just, even if it was a glorious, fun segment, it was funny, it would be painful for my mother, because you're
Yeah.
seeing also what's been lost and
Yeah.
what will never be.
What what could
So
have been? Yeah.
yeah, and I think that that's part of the profundity of murder, and
Yeah.
and even more so, notorious, salacious, sensationalized murders, because now your personal, private tragedy is being played out as a form of entertainment and
Yeah.
tabloid fodder across the world. And so, again, I think that was a huge fire, a flame, I should say, that really ignited. When I learned that, well, I don't want to give too much into the book, but I believe that what you should do is present everything and let people can make the comparisons and they decide for
Yeah.
themselves. But when I started seeing these red flags, and I still see them today in different formats of current exploitation and distortion, that is a flame that doesn't go away. And
Yeah.
and so so I think that there's a huge, not satisfaction, but in knowing that these are now being addressed in a very factual, forensic way. And I know what my entire family feels about that.
Yeah.
I wish that my grandparents would know that that would be addressed, but then again, I'm glad that they've not had to see what a shit show, not only in the mainstream media and pop culture, that these killers have become like rock star serial killers, and how their son was denigrated and slandered into not just a no count, but a scumbag.
Yeah.
And also to see what the hell's going on with these parole hearings and how justice has been betrayed. And
Yeah.
so anyway, you ask a great question, and I could go on and on about that, because it deals with not just my family, but it also deals with the damage that has been done to American history and culture. So much so that you have these events, and not just one night of horrific violence or two nights of horrific violence, as people like to put it in a nutshell, but 6 nights, maybe seven, of brutal, violent crime from a sustained time. of, well, we can get in that with what the Manson family is or what have you, but from late 67 all the way in the 70s, this was a crime gang. This was not a hippie cult. And so part of what gets under my skin and kicks me in the teeth is to address how these horrible murders have been exploited and distorted, and how history has been hijacked, and how we understand these things have been perversely hijacked.
Yeah.
And that comes at a cost for all of us. When we look at, wow, who calls Charles Manson Charlie? Why do we know that Leslie Van Houten's name was Lulu, or that Susan Atkins' name was Sadie, or that Charles Watson's is Tex? And why do we refer to them in those very familiar kind of nice things? Why do we say Charlie? It's because of how things have been processed in the sensational true crime industrial complex. So what you're doing now is you're either making the killers scarier, as Bugliosi did, because the scarier and more frightening and evil the bad people are, the boogeyman is in his book, the more heroic he becomes.
Yeah.
And the victims are incidental, they're collateral damage.
Yeah.
And
fodder. Yeah.
they're fodder and that's putting it nicely. And so if we're going to exploit it for package and sewing their demise, the first thing we have to do is strip them of their humanity. So these weren't
And
innocent.
dignity. Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so that's why I really appreciate what you're saying, and that this is beyond. Jay's story is so relevant on universal levels across the board. But when I see how these crimes have been manifested, twisted through the prisms of slander and distortion and titillation, you know, and I know, and I really appreciate when, you know, my partners in the documentary and Marshall in the book, the more we see what you're just saying, you know, you get pissed off. It's time to fight a little bit. It's time to tell the truth and to set the record straight. And, you know, you made a really good point about how you almost felt, I don't know, what did you say? Almost embarrassed, or that you kind of,
I didn't think beyond that, because my attention was too much on the shiny objects the press was throwing out there, you know. And you know what? Because you just go that way, you know.
but the fact that you saw you've seen Jay's story on the platforms that you've seen them, and you had that awareness, that says something about you and your integrity. And that's something that we are endeavoring when we put this out there. Let people decide for themselves. What seems more logical? What seems more factual? What is backed up with concrete evidence and facts, whether it be forensics, corroboration, all of these things. But what does it say about the people who don't want to hear or see these things? People who I can already hear it. And Marshall and I talked about this. Some people, like some publishers or what have you, might be like, don't put in there that a blood relative is co-authoring or working on this book, because he's too close to it, or he's too subjective. He's not objective enough. And I would posit that that is a fair argument. That is genuinely a fair argument. It would be a fair argument and a validated one if we were deifying Jay, if we were twisting the truth, if we were making this a tribute, celebrate, you know, but we don't. We get into the way he thought, how he enjoyed life, how he embodied the different things, in some cases, of the 60s. And, you know, we all have warts, and we don't exclude those, you know. But what does it say about some people when a book comes out and says, like, for instance, there's conspiracies, and yet there's nothing backed up in that. There's no concrete fact.
Just conjecture. Yeah.
Right. Or that, you know, they were involved in their own demise because of their illicit, decadent behavior. And yet we're looking for actual facts, and we address all the possibilities and all that. And so when people it makes me wonder, what is it about people who want it to be salacious, they want the victims to be illicit, who want Manson, they want a boogeyman, they want conspiracy, you know, the government agencies pulling strings. Well, shit, the Martians are next, because when those things kind of come out, we're going to do a book about the Martians and how they would, you know, 2001, they did land. The Kubrick had it right in 2001, dropping these slabs, and, you know, and the Martians had something to do with this. And it really is that despicably laughable. And it is.
Yeah.
It's so, and I think that the fact that you had the reaction that you did is really, that means something to hear that, because it shows that you have uh, an integrity. But what is that? Intellectual curiosity. I went to
Hmm.
I went to, man, you're going to be sorry you did this interview, because I'm just getting
No,
started.
not at all.
I've
And
only
I've
drunk,
got time, so
I've
let
only,
it
I've,
roll.
I've only drunk a pot and a half of coffee, and I'm going on a second of this.
We may need to take a bio break then, huh?
So I got a call when I was in Las Vegas years ago, and someone said, "Hey, Anthony, there is a LAPD exhibit at the Palms Hotel." I said, "What?" And there was something,
Is this
because I
the one
guess,
you have in the film?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's interesting that yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. So I snuck the camera in, and you saw the line of people wrapped around that hotel to go see this stuff. And they had Marilyn Monroe, and the RFK, the assassination, and of course Jay, and all his friends, and the whole Manson thing, and the Black Dahlia, and it was all out there. And they had little booths. It was like an event. It was like a carnival. So I, at the time, I didn't have I didn't know about the cell phone filming. So I asked my dad, "Do you have a video camera?" And he goes, "Shit, I got one. Let me look through the." It was one of those big ones that had like a handle on it. It was like
Yeah.
holding it like a gun. And I snuck that sucker in there, and I started filming. And that's all in the film. But the woman, there's a man in there who says, "Hey, you really like this stuff?" And I said, I don't remember what I said. I said, like, "No, I actually really hate it." And he goes, "Did you
Yeah.
know somebody?" And I said, "Yeah, you could say that." And I'm trying to focus, because I had ideas of how they would fit
Right.
for our, for Johnny to cut it in and do that. So I was really concentrating. And he goes, "Oh, really? You know somebody?" "Oh, I know Kato Kalin's cousin, the pet walker." I don't remember what he said. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, really?" And again, it really embodied kind of what you were saying earlier about how people process and consume these things. But the woman that was with him, we were waiting in line, and we happened to be standing right next to each other. And I was dumbstruck at the number of people that showed up to this thing. And I was almost like wanted to vomit. And I wanted to start filming, but there was literally like some LAPD people and different, and I did not want to open the opportunity for say, what are you doing? Or hey, no
Right.
filming.
Right.
Meanwhile, there were other people with their phones out once they got to the booth. So there wasn't that strict of a thing, but I didn't know that. I wanted to make sure I
Right.
got in. So I looked at the woman and I said, "Hey." She goes, "Hey." And I said, "How'd you hear about this?" Or something. And I don't remember. Yeah. She said, I said, what of all of these? What do you, which one do you?" And she goes, "Wow." I don't remember. She said she was from California. But she said, "Oh, the Manson thing. I've always been in it." And I said, "Yeah, me too. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. Yeah." I started looking around, and I said, "It's weird though, right? All these people here. It's crazy. I wonder if maybe one of our kids or our brothers or our parents were treated the way the Manson people treated their victims. I wonder if we'd be in line right now. I wonder if we would like it." And she said exactly what you said. Well, not exactly. She said, she didn't talk. It was like about 10 seconds. And she went, "God, that's weird. I kind of feel bad now." And I said, "Well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know how you should feel, but I wonder if we would be in line right now.
Yeah.
I wonder if we would enjoy this." That's it's really, that perspective is something that I know that all of the victims of these crimes, and sadly so many other, again, the industrial complex of notorious, titillating true crime.
Yeah.
It could even be the
Or
murder of a 6-year-old girl. And
true
so many,
crime, or true crime or politics, but I repeat myself. Yeah.
yeah, right. I mean, no,
Yeah.
and that's true. But like again,
Yeah.
if you get into some of these things, like the I'm telling you, you're looking at my pen and you say it's a pen, and I say no, it's a unicorn. And I'll be offended at you if you don't see that what I want you to see and say. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot going on now across. And that's a whole nother thing. But, you know, again, I think one of the things that becomes very clear in the book is all that matters is the truth.
Well, and even the nuances of how it's told. I'm remind you, you were talking about, and it struck me, it hit me pretty hard too, is, and it's instantly shifted something in my thinking where you talk about the murderers, pet names or nicknames. And I never realized until you mentioned it, it makes them a little more sweetly human when they don't deserve to be viewed that way. And so it got me to think about everything else that, words do mean things. And wordsmithing, that's a phrase that, is said that way for a reason. Makes you, have you thought about, since you have thought about how it's affected your family and yourself, did it change your view of how you watch the news or any kind of publicity? Because does it make, I mean, you mentioned Marilyn Monroe earlier. How much of that whole story we're hearing this, that, and the other, and conspiracy theories and the Kennedys, all that kind of stuff? Maybe there's a whole different thing that we haven't been told, or the words have been used in such a way that shifts our direction and how we think about her murder, or not her murder, but her death, and whatever else could come into play. I mean, to me, that's a derivative of of your research and the impact on you and your family. I mean, in other words, it can kind of make you a bit jaded on how you process things now because of that. Has that happened with you and your family?
Oh, 100%. When you're impacted the way in a very direct, real way, and then you see how things are played out as form of titillation or cotton candy, you start
Mm-hmm.
questioning things, and that manifests all the way down. You mentioned words. Not only do words mean something, but headlines mean something.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Susan Atkins' parole hearing, my parents and I, and we went to the parole hearing, and we spoke. And a lot of these things are covered in the book. But my father said something. He's a Detroit City guy, and he's probably one of the wisest men I've ever met. Street smarts, everything. And you're in an 8-hour parole hearing, and we missed our plane actually that was going to fly out to Burbank, and we had to go. And so Pat Secure, the DA, he was extraordinary. He drove us to LAX and helped us get a flight so we could get home for the
Wow.
next day at work. Yeah, Pat is a great guy. So we're on the plane, and my father said, it's daunting to sit in that room and hear what took place in those crimes, and then know that tomorrow the headlines are going to read Manson follower denied parole. He said the headline should read cold-blooded convicted killer of 8 found unsuitable for release. It's very important. That's the reality. But when these headlines start calling people a hippie cult and a Manson follower, that has profound consequences, not only to our families today in our fight for justice in these parole hearings, but for justice. And it also has a profound impact on how we understand the atrocities of what happened and what these people did that literally altered the path of American history. Joan Didion famously wrote that. Many believe that the hippie movement ended abruptly on August 9th, 1969, when word of the murders spread like wildfire throughout Southern California. That's almost verbatim, because I
Yeah.
say that at the parole hearings. Because these crimes didn't end on those nights. But the
Right.
fact that they prop themselves up as victims or followers of Manson, they're the victims now.
Yeah.
And also what that does is it again diminishes who the victims are. So now we're putting the ball and all the focus on the murders, as you astutely, pointed out earlier. And so that is part of the consequences of what you're saying, the power of words and or of distortion. But then I look at you asked about how we process news, and I can talk specifically about some of the things that made me want to do a documentary on other things. And if anyone has a huge amount of money, no, I'm joking. When I was watching, my mother and I were watching the news one afternoon, and they were covering Natalie Holloway, the murder of a young lady in I think somewhere in the Caribbean or wherever it was.
Aruba, yeah.
Aruba, okay. So my mother's watching it, and the mother was speaking of Natalie Holloway. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name. And then she was done speaking, and essentially she was trying to figure out what the hell happened, and please bring attention, get my daughter home. And then they had the three pundits afterward, and the news person, and then they were talking about scenarios of what happened, and actually, in some cases, laughing about it. And my mother said, "That poor family, that poor woman, I know what lies next for them."
Yeah.
She's right. And it's like the hell. Now, when JonBenet Ramsey's murder happened, I was struck that every grocery store I went to, any tabloid magazine, not newspapers, if you could refer to them as that, at the grocery store, before you pay for your food, which is another form of consumption, except it's shit.
Yeah.
Is a picture of JonBenet Ramsey in perverted poses with a tiara, with adult makeup and adult clothes on and doing
seductive
these things.
Yeah.
Nothing normal. There was no picture of her blowing out her candles. There was no student pictures that I saw.
And playing with her toys. Yeah.
No, none of that. Opening a Christmas present if they celebrated Christmas. None of that. You know why? Because that's too normal. Yeah. Because no one wants to see a beautiful, innocent child treated and experience a horrific demise like that. So what do? As I said earlier, we strip her of her humanity and make her a freak of a freak family. And now we can all get off on this stuff. I can promote it and make tons of money, guilt-free, and you, my consumers, can consume it and enjoy the hell out of yourselves over it. Guilt-free as well also, because you know what? She was a scumbag kid and she deserved it. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's important to say that's not what happened, but that is really as despicable. Because I used to blame the exploitative media and the sensational, but now I blame also their consumers, their listeners.
Yes.
Because the only thing worse than an idiot are the idiots listening to the idiot.
Consumers want to escape the miserable, boring normalness of our lives. And so we escape through entertainers and entertainment or the misery of other people so we don't feel so bad about our own lives. I think there's some freaks out there that say, wow, they got away with that. Maybe I can do something like that and get away with it too, or something. I think there's those tiers of people. And I think that's what happened with your uncle and those that were killed with him. We can unload, we as society unload crap on them so we don't feel so bad about ourselves.
That is
where the attention goes away from us.
You're absolutely right. And we cover, again, there's a psychology behind all of this. And you just addressed like 2 or 3 of them. We both did, right? We were exchanging. But another thing that's interesting, and again, the book really doesn't just say this is what happened. We don't just say that Jay did this. We get into what made him think of doing it in the first place. What made him think of doing something that no one ever did? And in the case of what we're talking about, what made people create the dramatic structure, the sensational structure of distortion and titillation? And what's the thinking behind that? And you just made some great analysis of it and shared that. Another one of them is when we are confronted with a horrific event, a horrific, unspeakable event, in which maybe my family and I, at 12 midnight, could be stabbed 56 times, could be stabbed with my own butcher knife and carving fork 29 times, 41 times, for no reason whatsoever. How in the hell did that happen? Why did that happen? You know why? Because we got to make sense of it. So
Yeah.
now people are trying to make sense, to say, to calm their fears, to say, oh, you know what? I wasn't those decadent Hollywood types. That will never happen to my family and I. Oh, I wasn't doing what the people, there was something going on with at the Waverly address. Now they had to do something. Oh yeah, and then you have people going, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're onto something, and then speculation becomes titillation, and titillation becomes fact. But
Yeah.
what it does is it suits all the needs and insecurities that you just mentioned, that we both are mentioning, and also this existential need to make sense out of the horrific fates that any of us could have at any given time. When someone who's young gets cancer, there's always a question: how'd they get it? Did they
Yeah.
smoke? It's never, sadly, I think too many of us have been impacted, by cancer.
Yep. Well, I think we can even go back, not to get churchy, but you look in the Bible and they say, somebody come up to Jesus and said, who sinned? His father? Did this person sin, or did their father sin in order for them to have the illness that they have? And he said, neither, but it's something I think as human beings are wired about. So I didn't write this down, and I don't want to get away from the book. But I'm just curious, with everything you've experienced, you and your family experienced, as far as how things do get sensationalized and maligned, distorted, lied about, all that stuff. Fast forward to today when you see a news story like the Epstein files. How does your experience, you and your family's experience, turn around and you look at a story like that and you think, okay, what are they doing with this story that's similar to what happened with Jay's murder? And do you feel like you look at that whole thing differently than most of society does because of what happened with Jay and the story of his murder?
With that, I don't know enough to really I mean, the man's dead,
Yeah.
and I think that he's got, clearly, from what I understand, numerous victims. There needs to be justice somehow. There needs to be
Yeah.
some sort of regard for all of this, and so. But with that, I also think that is a story that involves more than just true crime, but a lot of different things, and anything that, when you get political, of course, I not that I love it, but I do. Again, if your regard and your aim is the truth, that's what I do. So I cross reference like you wouldn't believe. But I
Yeah.
just don't feel that I know enough with regard to that. But then I saw, there was a Steve McQueen documentary that was just produced, and I taped it, and there's no mention of Jay and Jason. And then it's not because I'm upset that they didn't mention Jay; they just didn't. And I'm like, okay. And they talk about how he was supposed to be there that night, and that's, again, that's another one of these sadly laughable but pitiful, myths. And supposedly, well, I know for a fact who was supposed to be there and who wasn't supposed to be there. And Jay was not supposed to be there, and we cover that in the book. And um, and so there's always, and then they said, and then the other party goers were killed. Again, another narrative. These were not party
Yeah.
goers. These were
Yeah.
three of the people lived in the house. Abigail was reading a book in bed, getting ready to retire for the night. Wojtek was slumbering in the living room sofa, and Sharon and Jay were speaking in her bedroom, and she clearly was gonna go to bed. This is not a party, and yet the narrative, a documentary just produced, omits really important information and is sculpting yet another story, more silly mythology, that Steve was supposed to be there that night and that this was some sort of a party.
Yeah.
And this comes at an expense, again, not just to the victim's memory, but also to how we understand a historic event culturally. And
Yeah.
so, what's, again, and I think we addressed that whole myth. I mean, shit, if you look at all the people who said they were supposed to be at the house that night, and it's everywhere from Rick James, Robert Vaughn, Steve McQueen, Warren Beatty told me he was supposed to be there that night in person. And it's like everybody was supposed to be at this house. Now, if we look at things logistically, and we say, okay, this was a well-known house since like the 1920s almost, in which typically either film or production or music people were living in that house. Now, some people would say it was a party house. No, it wasn't, but it was a well-known house throughout the day. You know, people, Samantha Eggers, I think, lived there. Quincy Jones told me that he was thinking of moving there. And, you know, so people knew this house, but also there was, you know, Terry Melcher and Candace Bergen had a lot of parties up there and different things. So if we go back to this whole myth, I was supposed to be there. This was a Friday night in Benedict Canyon, in the Hollywood Hills, in which a Friday night, nearly every A-list musician, film actor, producer, in which nearly every one of them in town, all of Hollywood practically, was invited to a party on Friday night. And mind-numbingly, not one fucking person showed up to. That's pretty amazing. That, talk about history. That's pretty historical. That on a Friday night at a well-known thing in which everyone's invited to, and not one person shows up. And if we look at these things, and this is just one more little thing, you know, myth, urban tale, whatever you want to call it, and we look at things from a rational, sober perspective, and then we look at the facts of different things. And we have several people who have corroborated that Jay wasn't even supposed to be in town that night. And sadly, that's another enigma that we'll never know why.
Yeah.
We'll explore it, and there will be some things, and people will make up their own minds. But again, that is just one example of how ludicrous and how insane this has spiraled into. Now, I don't know if you know this, but maybe, I think you don't know it, but I know it. You were supposed to be there that night.
Yeah, I was 10 years old and a party animal. So
you had the beer bong, man.
yeah, that's right. I was I was, you know, adult way beyond my years. So
and I don't mean to make light, but sometimes humor is probably the best way to reveal, or satire, to say this is insanity. And when does the insanity stop?
That's right. And why does it have to get to that point? Because the story by itself is intriguing, and I say that respectfully, or compelling by itself. The facts alone, they don't need to be. It's like people I know, they exaggerate their own resume, and I'm kind of sad for them because, you know, the resume is pretty cool on, you know, the true resume is. They don't need to embellish, you know, and in the case of all of this, you know, if it had not been sensationalized, I think truly the stories would have been much cooler to follow, because once a story has been discredited, or it looks like it's going down some sort of crazy train type of thing, a lot of the population, like myself, will turn it off. It'll be like, you know, you've lost me there. Give me the truth, give me reality, and you may have a good chance of having me hooked. And I'm hoping society today is more like that than the simple minds we had as a society back in the late 60s, you know, that just...
Well, you know, I think that you make a really good point, and I do think there is some sort of a transitional thing. And I'll give you an example, and you mentioned the 60s, so maybe this is part of it, but there is a new kind of an activism. I mean, people, and again, I think it's important to not just take it with one fell swoop, but activism, there's authentic activism, and then there's faux performative activism, and then there's just self-promotional activism, what have you.
Yeah.
But there's something happening right now that there is a little, and I'll give you an example. There was a podcaster. She has a podcast, Alicia Stanton, and she did. It's called True or Crime. So somebody brought to my attention that she mentions the documentary in Jay's story, and I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. You know, it's been 5 years since its release, and she advocates that people watch the documentary. So I looked up the post and what she said, and I reached out to her, and she was really. And so we did a podcast and everything. But I said to her, I said, I think it's interesting that you truly are doing something and saying something, as you are actually, as we're both doing right now in today's podcast, asking questions and addressing things that go beyond the titillation. And I said, you're actually really addressing, or at least embracing, the victim's perspective. I said, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what that is? And she made some great points, and she really, and she's young, and so that was encouraging. And that I think that what you're either alluding to or whatever, I do think that things are changing in a bit, whether it be younger generation or the more that people start to see and question media narratives and agendas, that they want to know the truth more. And now I think also people are realizing, they want to know about the victims. And when we know more about the victims, we'll understand more about history and also about crime, and how to help diminish crime. And that's a core cultural reality.
It is. And as I think society gets, I mean, it's already being talked about how we are navigating away from network news. And I would dare say even away from cable news. We, people, we say we want the truth. I hope it's not people saying we want the truth that fits our narrative. I'm afraid there's a lot of that.
You know what? I think you hit something on the head. Not everyone, but I think you're right. And they're going to the internet now, and they're not buying newspapers, and they're not, I mean, it's like, my only posit to that is, if you're watching network or cable, or if you're getting newspapers, identify some of these things and cross-reference, and maybe do some of your own investigation on events, whether it be go to a library, maybe. But I mean, now it's, I'm going to get on my
concept
phone.
now. Well, shifting gears a little bit, I was very intrigued with the clientele your uncle had, and I want to let's look at the music side of it, because obviously that's mostly what I get into on my interviews. But I was intrigued about I don't want to tell the story for you, and I don't want to tell the story of the whole book because I want people to buy your book. But there is I'll let you tell if it's a direct or an indirect connection between Jay and Elvis. And what I know what it is, but I would like for you, out of your own mouth, tell viewers Jay's connection to Elvis Presley.
Well,
directly or indirectly.
Oh, no. It's definitely direct. There's no doubt. It's direct. I mean, if you're talking about any clientele that actually went to Jay, or it's direct. Excuse me. So, obviously, there was a demand for Jay worldwide when it came to different things. I mean, and it bridged across. It went into music, into film, into production, politicians, even some, top-notch, heavy business people and mobsters, whatever. People who demanded the best or wanted that exclusive best, that high quality, they went to Jay. They saw him out. So Elvis, evidently Jay and Elvis didn't get along too well. They both probably were, I'm not going to say, because Jay didn't compete with other men. He competed with himself, really. And I think that you had two guys who, I think Elvis was used to having his crew and people do whatever. And I don't want to be, because from what I understand, Elvis was a very good man with his friends, and that's what I understand. But he was telling Jay how to cut his hair, and he was complaining about a cowlick in the back. And Jay's like, okay, yeah, let me just, and so, I don't think Elvis knew, but he was there for Jay. Jay wasn't there for Elvis. And so at one point he cut into that cowlick, and Elvis evidently, and so there was a thing, and he says, I'm not done. And sometimes in hair, sometimes that happens. You cut, you go, oh shit, I didn't see that happening. And then you got to sprig. You got to figure out, do I shape like a hedge or like a shrub, or now what do we do? Yeah. That's part of the unknown of doing hair and cutting hair. So of course Elvis wanted Jay's services and talents, but they just, and so Jay cut him on set, cut him out, Sinatra was doing, he was campaigning for RF. So anyway, and then and Elvis would come into the shop. First, before Jay knew you, you had to come into the shop. Jay's not going to go. And then you're going to pay the rates to go on set or what have you. So it became clear that eventually maybe that Elvis wanted the Sebring talent and style, but maybe didn't want to, I don't know. He wanted somebody to do it not only high quality but he also wanted him to do it the way he wanted to do it, meaning show up at my house when I do this. And Jay was like, no, you're going to do it when it fits my schedule, and you're going to do that. That's just how it goes. So eventually there was Sal Orafice who cut, and Elvis liked the Sebring method so much that he literally and Jay was very gregarious and very confident. Sal Orafice became Elvis's personal stylist, the Sebring cutter, for about a year, and then he left, and then Larry Geller became Elvis's personal. But they both were Sebring stylists and trained absolutely extensively.
Well, do you think I didn't think of this until just now, and I should have thought of it sooner, but the fact that Jay was doing Sinatra's hair, and I know there was a friendly competition between Elvis and Frank Sinatra. He bought a Stutz Bearcat out from under Sinatra. So it kind of makes you wonder, if maybe that was Elvis's motivation there. Don't know.
Wait, motivation for what?
To go to Jay, and, that initiated that contact, but then, there was the headbutting going on. And so ultimately, he gets a Jay protege. And that's almost as well.
No, what's interesting is that Jay, he was a rugged individualist, and frankly, even Cammie and our family, there was one man that Jay really was, and that was his father. And they, as we'll get into the book, but they weren't really copacetic with each other, so we'll get into all of that. But then that relationship kind of evolved over the years, and but. So he didn't really, people didn't call the shots with him. I mean, no matter who they were. And so, but there is an interesting story that Jay was late to cut Frank's hair because he had to drive, I forget, but he had to drive from doing Elvis's hair. And when Frank found out later that he was late because he was cutting Elvis's hair, and that there was a little bit of a rift there. And yet, Frank was a huge proponent of Jay's and a huge advocate, and he was older, so he did kind of a little bit older than Jay, but Jay had an incredible admiration for Frank's talents and his style, and so they shared that mutual appreciation of each other and massive respect. So they remained close all the way up through his death, and so, but it's a fun story, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Part of that lore. I mean, it's not lore because it's true, but it adds to that whole dynamic that we've, as fans, have come to understand.
Well,
I've got it.
I was just going to say, it is funny because some guy was telling me one time, he says, Jay, man, he had the life because he could party with Steve. And I mean, again, that story embodies this. He was late from cutting one icon's hair because he was doing another icon's hair. And it wasn't that, and Jay typically was late for a lot of stuff. It just was part of his wiring, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, these were people that were gravitating to him, not that he was peripheral to them. You know what I'm saying? And I'm sorry, you started to say something that was about Steve. Did you, Steve, or?
Oh gosh, it'll come back to me. But well, one thing I would say is with Steve McQueen, the fact that Jay had a direct impact that it sounds to me like that directly impacted the trajectory of McQueen's career with a haircut, and really the same way with Jim Morrison. I mean, there are two, and I guess you could say Bruce Lee too. Yep. I mean, wow. Who would have thought?
Well, it's interesting, and who would have thought a haircut could do that? But also, there was something about Jay. It was his style and how he carried himself. What made Jay so great is his extreme regard for high quality. He
Yeah.
knew what looked best on himself, the clothes, how to have them fitted, and instead of, like, as Bugliosi shaped that somehow into he was insecure and overcompensating. No, 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 no. This was a man who knew how to bring out the best in himself and his clients, and he shared that. So it was through Jay's lifestyle, even with the Cobra and the Jag and the Porsche. He had an extreme regard for everything in life, whether it be a car, fabrics, clothing, a haircut, women. It was everything. And that's what he demanded of himself and wanted to express and also to share with his clients and friends and with culture. And so what he did with Steve is often referred to as the king of cool. Well,
Right.
if he is, Jay's the architect of cool.
Yep.
Jay, what he lived, and Steve wanted a Cobra because Jay had the Cobra. He parked that right outside his shop. Bruce Lee wanted a Cobra. Also, Jim Morrison. I mean, these are well-known facts. And again, these are also things that were shared to me directly from, Stephen Davis, and also the Jim Morrison, the Doors biographer, great guy, by the way, and also by Linda Lee. I mean, these are corroborated by, it's not just kind of like mythology or me wanting it to be that way, you know.
Yeah.
So, but it was in his demeanor. When you see, Cammie said this, Jay Sebring's former wife, Thomas Crown and Bullet, that's all Jay Sebring. Not just the haircut, but the calm, quiet coolness. And when you have that kind of charisma and power, any actor or musician is going to glean from that. And
Mhm.
that's who Jay was. And that's the unspoken part that people really don't know. And again, in the book, we're going to get into the details about some of these things. But if you look at a picture of Bruce Lee pre-Sebring and then a picture of him after, it's a profound, transformative, stark difference.
Yep. Yep. Well, I mean, the fact that he single-handedly changed that whole business too. I mean, prior to him, these guys just got their haircuts, right? And it may or may not have worked well for them. They may have had to use a little bit too much Brill cream or something back in the day. But to to go from that to being styled, actually sculpted, art taking place with the hair. I could use that. I mean, I'm losing a bit here, bald spot back there, the whole nine. I mean, I'd love to be transformed, but
Mhm.
to have that take place, and then now you look at the industry, $100 billion industry, you've had to be thinking, gosh, what would Jay think about all that now? Because he single-handedly kicked that ball into play for that to start cascading down to what it is today. What would he, in your mind, what would you think he would be saying about all this?
I think he would quietly have a smile on his face. I also think that he was not one to say, "Hey, let me tell you," but I also think, ironically, I mean, if you look at it, the pay paradigm was Jay obliterated that. He obliterated the restrictions, the rigid of a barbershop and a beauty salon,
Right.
and he took that freedom and treated it as
That was a
design.
hard fight too that people don't
Yeah.
fully appreciate. I mean, you detail that in the book about how long he had to fight against the unions and the regulators and all that to be able to do what he did.
Well, you're right, and he even said in his film, he said, strangely enough, my biggest opposition, some of it, has been from the industry itself. And instead
Hmm.
of them wanting to elevate themselves because they were intimidated by his success, they didn't know what the hell he was doing. They hated the fact that guys were saying, "Hey, I want a Sebring cut, and I'll pay you $20, even though you're only getting $1.75 or $1 or 75 cents." That chafed their hide, and so instead of trying to, like, well, what the hell is this guy doing? Then it was, us against him, and they tried to shut him down, as you just pointed out. And a lot of people, and again, it wasn't just that; it was in many different ways with different industries. And the book really, and I think that what's that you bring these things up. It's great to see that people are starting to know actually that Jay was the seminal. He was the not the godfather. He was the architect. He was the creator. He was the revolutionary, the pioneer. But I also think that he had visions of expanding his visions and his talents beyond the industries that he created and beyond hair. And again, we'll get into that in books, but in the book. But I mean, some of it I think might have been politics. Some of it might have been philanthropic. Some of it might have been in production. But he had an expansive eye. There was nothing about him that was inside the box in every walk of his life.
I'm curious, that house of his, unless I viewed it wrong, it looked like you filmed some there when you were talking to Cammie, and it seemed like one or two others there. Just curious, do you know what has happened with the house? Is it still as it was? I mean, tell me a little bit about that house. I was fascinated by that house.
Yeah, the house is extraordinary. And, the house has a huge history to it with Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne. And obviously, the tragic demise of Paul Byrne upstairs in that house. And there's quite a history to it. But the house still does exist. We filmed there maybe 2 or 3 times. We never went inside, which was unfortunate because I really wanted to. But it
looked like it was being remodeled during the film. I mean, because there was some piles of stuff or something. What? Tell me the story. What's going on with that?
I guess you could say there was some remodeling going on. Yeah. So I couldn't get in the house, and I said, "Hey, man, we'll pay you." And so unfortunately we could. And I do speak with Jay's next door neighbor. He's Kurt Zacco. He's just a great guy, and he tells us a lot about the house because I mean he's still he lives in that area. So yeah, the man who lives there now is I haven't really spoken with him recently, but I know that they have endured some mudslides that have been hit over there and things. So, but the house is still in good shape. I really do wish that I could go up there sometime and see it all, because I was there once, and that was several weeks, I think, or a week after the murders, and I was 3 years old, and my parents left Las Vegas, or they came and they met with my grandparents to accompany them in dealing with some of these things, with the funeral, with Jay's home, with his belongings. And so I do remember being there, and it's a stark memory. And that's another interesting thing. Some people say, come on, you were 3 years old. Who were you to write this book? Who do you think? What are you doing? And I don't think, again, I can understand where someone would think that, but I have an extraordinary memory. No, I really do. But more than that, for anyone who knew Jay, they would mention how dynamic and charismatic he was, even to a 3-year-old kid when he would visit Las Vegas. And we would run in the yard, and he would chase me, and he'd let me chase him. So I didn't feel like he was like an adult, or I didn't see it as I saw him as a cool cat. I didn't, So
your funkle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was the cool. Yeah. And so we went to the house, and the house was like something out of Disneyland. It was beautiful. This Tudor style, looked like a Swiss chalet, as some people refer to it, and it did have that not steel beams, stained wood beams in white, and the floors, and it almost, things looked like it was there for hundreds, maybe 1,000 years, and it was beautiful. So as a kid, this looked like, wow, this is like Disneyland. Like, what? There's nowhere like this in Vegas. It's stucco houses, and and also the cinder block houses. So we went there, and when my grandparents and mother went up the stairs, they went up, and I couldn't wait to go upstairs. And I wanted to go, and my father said, "No, Anthony, you stay with me." And I said, "No, I want to." And I got really upset because I couldn't go up there. And my dad said, "Anthony, do you want to see the pool?" And I said, "Yeah." So we went outside, and the pool was being drained. And I remember thinking, this pool looks deeper than anything I've ever seen, and it scared me kind of. It was just that it was weird. There was an element of like, wow, I want to go back in the house. And so we went back in the house, and we were my dad was really taking care of me and protecting his wife and parents-in-law. Um, and all of a sudden there was like, I don't think it was a knock, but a doorbell or something. And my dad went to the door, and I ran up next to him. Like, I don't know how tall. I mean, I was really short, but and any kid's going to think, who's coming to the house to see me, right? Because
Yeah.
as a kid, everything is about you. And I thought,
Right.
man, this magical place, and who's going to come here and show me some cool things or whatever. And he opened the door, and it was a girl that was maybe 10 or 12. I don't know how old she was, but she struck me as, again, there's something unique about going to California from,
Mm-hmm.
say, Nevada or Arizona or Utah or Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
or anywhere. There's something unique to the lush up in those canyons of the plantation, all the the plants and everything. It's extraordinary, and has a magical, timeless quality to it. And this, really, what I thought was, she was cute, and I knew she was older than me, and she was dressed in what almost looked like she dressed nice, like an Easter dress or something, with a box of, I don't remember if it was pastries. I seem to remember it was pastries. It was something. It could have been donuts, but I don't think so. I think it was pastries. And I was just looking at her, and she didn't come in. She just gave it to us, and clearly she was the child of one of the neighbors who saw that Jay's family had come to deal with things.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. That's that's time doesn't, they say time heals. I question that sometimes, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
And but I think it's a blessing that you have the memory that you do, the kind of memory, the steel trap memory, to even
Hmm.
be able to remember that. As tough as that was, that's also, I think important and very cathartic for you, your mom, your dad, and it's. I think it's a tremendous God-given tool that you have to be able to do what you're doing in restoring to proper position the memory of your uncle.
Thank
And
you.
it has the whole thing. And I'm not saying this to patronize you, Anthony. I'm really not. But to see how deep this went. Obviously, I mean, it'd be the same with any other family who had endured similar kinds of tragedies that didn't make international headlines. People that have died 50 years ago and are still, their family's still alive. They don't forget that person when the world already has.
Hmm.
Your situation is a bit different. Jay tied to a sensationalized, senseless chain of murders there, and they were maligned. That if the book, if your aim of the book was to help properly present the story and the facts about Jay's life and his murder, you've done that, but you've also, I think, the underlying tone there too, and the impact for me is it's also helping me change how I process stories, facts. I'll never get it 100% right because, hey, when people are trying to skew you into a different direction and you're not aware of it, you may fall victim to it. But
Hmm.
I hope I'm a bit wiser now because of that. I don't watch much news anymore. I'll read it. I scan the headlines just to see what's going on. Epstein's a thing now. DOJ is on something. Okay, fine. What do I need to do today to take care of my dad? That's that's headline news to me.
Hmm.
Everything else I have to try to put into perspective of, all right, that's interesting. I want to be aware of it. But when I do drill into something, I'm trying to be more aware what words are used.
Hmm.
Recently Jimmy Swaggart died. Okay, what did the headline say? Disgraced televangelist passes away. You know, that thing with the hookers was over 40 years ago. I'm not a big fan of Jimmy Swaggart, but I happen to know he had good impact on some people even after that. But that's the moniker on him that he earned that one. Jay didn't earn what has been hung around his neck, and that's a lesson to me, to look past what's being dangled in front of me so I can say, hey, who's behind those curtains there in Oz, And I think this story is a tremendous example of how that happens and how it has long-ranging effects on people.
Well, thank
It
you.
really
And
does.
a consequence, not just to the memory of the victims and their families, but also historical impact and cultural impact. And if we're getting things through mythology or distortion or titillation or whatever, it comes at a corrosive cost. It can be
Yeah.
pernicious even. And so I appreciate that aspect of what you just described resonates with you. And that is, in fact, the universe. Any great story is in the substance of the story, but also
Yeah.
great stories have a universal relevance for you and I, for all of us, for with regard to human dimension. And Jay's life, death, and legacy across the board resonates with us universally on so many different levels. And his life is extraordinary that way. And to your
Mhm.
point, I would say that if we knew more about all of the victims, that there would be aspects of that as well. But I do really I really appreciate what you were saying about how hard and how committed, dedicated I was in this journey, and but that also comes from a ton of, I mean, this is mentioned in the book. It's almost as if Jay's parents knew that this story somehow would be told. They saved everything, and my parents saved things, and my aunt and our family. I have letters that my mother wrote when she was like 5, 6 years old. I think, yeah, around that time when he was on a destroyer. He saved that letter. Why did he
Wow.
save that letter? I mean, I have letters that when he got in trouble, that his parents made him write I don't know what to call it, but I will not talk back. I will not sass you. I will not. Why did they save that stuff? This was almost
Hmm.
my family, our family, Jay's family. They're all an intrinsic part of this blueprint that in many ways, I mean, it was just like unbelievable. And I'm seeing it with my own eyes. I'm seeing letters from Bruce Lee and Robert F. Kennedy. And, I mean, it's extensive. And these are, you know, Jackie Stewart. I had no
Yeah.
idea that Scottish race car driver Jackie Stewart was friends with Jay, and that he was, I
Wow.
mean, so you have all these letters and things they were all saved. I'm talking massive amounts of things, and so I really owe a tremendous regard and to our family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And all the family and friends that did interviews who did these things when some people wouldn't. I actually had some people ask how much our budget was to see if they could get paid, and so I mean, oh yeah, no, it's endless how some people process these things or how they approach things, if you could say that. But so I really appreciate that. But I'm grateful that one of those universal aspects that goes into how we understand cultural and historic events, it's really important.
Yep. It is. So what happens next? The book just came out last week, right?
No, no, it's going to come out on the 25th, July
On the
25th.
for some reason I was thinking the 18th. So this week. And so
Yeah.
um, what what happens with you after this book lands? I'm sure there's going to be more of this kind of stuff taking place. What else you have going on in support of that? And then what's next for you once the activity of this simmers down?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. This has been a really profoundly extensive endeavor, and as it demands.
Right.
And so, again, so that's a great question. I think it's going to take a little bit of time off for me to, kind of examine, and I'm looking forward to that. There are some other stories, whether it be mostly like documentaries and things that I'm looking at and speaking with different people. That's really a passion of mine, is stories, and again, stories that not only are relevant stories but unknown stories. And
Yeah.
so, you know, so it's like in this case, we're restoring the face to somebody who is historically, culturally relevant, but who's been erased. And we explore not only and restore and tell that story, but then we examine why what was that industrial complex with so many thousands of people that would do what they did to erase, for instance, what Jay did in the last moments of his life. Twice,
Mm-hmm.
twice he tried to stop things. Very
Mm-hmm.
physical. What is what is it that people would suppress that and not just sweep it under the rug, but really flush it down the toilet?
Right.
And you know, I had a conversation with Quentin Tarantino. At first, I was really concerned that because we've seen nothing but decades of exploitation and slander and sensationalism, and I was fortunate enough to speak with Quentin Tarantino and Shannon McIntosh, one of his producers, very talented, and I found them both to be incredibly stand up and noble. And they were, you know, Quentin did an interview, you know, for this, and he's
Yeah.
part of the story now, and very kindly and very supportive in all of this. And I was moved by that, but I also initially that was not what my concern was. Oh my gosh, you know, here's going to be a massive blockbuster in which not yet again that the victims are mistreated or kind of peripheral or, you know, abused, if you will, and the facts betrayed, but then also the killers would be somehow glamorized. And I was really, really concerned about this because Quentin Tarantino is a different person. He's not some schmuck or some chump who's going to peddle a book. You know what I'm saying?
He
He's
has
he's
ties to this area where I live too. So
oh
yeah,
really?
I know what you mean. Yeah, the Knoxville, Tennessee area. So
Oh, okay, cool. Well, now
yeah,
with him, I mean, if he does something, you know, there's some people who think that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is an actual film,
true story.
like a biopic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not making fun, or you know, I'm just saying
No.
that, that's how people are processing things, especially when you have somebody of the status of Quentin Tarantino. So I
Hmm.
was really concerned for my family and I, for Jay and all the victims and their families, and I just felt the need to say, hey, please do the right thing. No, I'm not asking you to be, you know, again, to deify anybody. I'm just saying, please don't do exploitation and sensationalize and glamorize despicable people and perpetuate what has been exploited for over 56 years now. And he was extraordinary. He says, I'm not interested in the murders. I don't, you know, and so I said, well, I said, Quentin, I wouldn't mind if you did, as long as you tell the truth. Show what Jay did in that room that night. Show how despicable these people were and how cowardly they were. Tell the truth. And, you know, clearly what Quentin did was his kind of like uh, fairy tale to Hollywood. And he had his, you know, kind of his revisionist version of everything without getting too into it. But I really appreciated his care and concern that he showed my family and I.
Yeah.
And actually, we shared, in the process of several meetings, we shared some information with him in terms of images and different things for Jay's house, you know, just for reference for their design
Right.
team and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was extraordinary. And then of course he was very supportive of Jay's story, you know, and it's his interview, but also his just, yeah, that was
Wow.
a very interesting thing, but it was nice to
Well,
see.
on those documentaries, if there's anything that you feel would be a good of big interest to my audience that I present to, which primarily are baby boomers, but you know, it's anybody who is interested in all the cool stuff we got to enjoy while we were growing up, you know.
Mhm.
And but so any of those documentaries, any other books you have coming out, anything like that, man, my door is open to you. And I want to say again, just my hats off to you and Marshall both. A phenomenal job. Phenomenal. I can't stress that enough of what you did with this book. And I'll even reach back to the documentary again. I think I don't think one replaces the other. I think they complement each other. and one shouldn't just watch the documentary without reading the book, in my opinion. That the two work very well hand in hand, and
You,
I
you
hope
make
that.
an
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Well, I was going to say you make great points that I almost like I want to forget it, but you're absolutely right. I mean, and first of all, thank you. I hope that we stay in touch the way you and Marshall have, and that's a huge compliment, and I respect that, appreciate it. To your point about the documentary, there are only some things you can do in a feature length documentary that you can't do in a book, and there's only things that you can do in a 560 some odd page book that you can't do in any film. That I mean, and so they each, and as you said, they they complement each other. But you're going to get some things that it's crucial, and I'm really excited about the book. I'm thrilled about it because we address so much and so much that has happened since the film's release, even 5 years ago. You know what I'm saying? And there's something, for some reason, that's it. Sometimes there's a shelf life. Well, we're going to have distribution for the documentary in later this year in the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. There's a reason for that. It means that Jay's story is relevant.
Yep.
And this book, I mean, we can now, going full circle. How in the hell has someone not wanted to tell Jay's story on an expansive level like we have in the doc? But with this book, we get into the details, and you all the way to present. And shit,
Mm-hmm.
Marshall will tell you, he goes, "And we've passed the time of adding stuff." He's like, it was not because he didn't want to, but like, there were some things that happened in recent parole hearings and different things. Now we are up to date with all the parole hearings, but this is all intrinsic to Jay's legacy because it's part of his legacy. And so, but my point is that this book, I mean, I appreciate that you say one doesn't preclude the other. They are both expansive, but this book, I am very excited that we're going to be able to address some things even now that are crucial to the understanding of Jay and all of us.
Yep. Well, I'm going to hit Marshall up for I want to get a hard copy of it because I've only read the PDF. I'd love for both of you to sign it. It would be, I don't give those things away, man. I've got a collection of autographed books, but I want to go back through the book when I get a hard copy because there's something about holding it that helps you get more out of it than scrolling,
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I look forward to because there's, I had to read this quickly to be ready for today, but I want to go back and see what I missed. There was just so much there, so much detail, and it's the kind of stuff that I absolutely love. That don't get me wrong, I don't love reading about murders, but the granularity that you guys went into on this, I mean, nobody can challenge the facts. That's for sure. So you guys, again, phenomenal job. I just can't say it enough.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And definitely Marshall and I it will definitely be signed, but and that's a huge compliment. And to your point, if you look at any book that I've significantly read or invested in, I mean, there's no, I write on them, I'm putting notes. I mean, I don't, it's like, it's a manuscript to me at that point, it's something that it's like a sketchbook, but, and yeah, I'm with you. I like the newspaper. I don't want a computer, but thank you. I really enjoyed
speaking. Well, I hope my dream now is I grew up in Arizona. I was born here in Tennessee, but I grew up in the Phoenix area. My dream is I'm way overdue for a vacation. I would love to hit Phoenix, happen to be where you're there at the same time. You and Marshall and I just get together for 2 or 3, 4 hours and just talk stuff, not just about this book, but all the things we love, man, music, rock and roll, history, all that kind of stuff, and just tear it up, man. I think we'd have a lot of fun with that. So.
Oh yeah, no, we actually, when I mentioned Scott before, I mean, Marshall, we went to a place up on Laurel Canyon when they were able to come into town, and we definitely did that. There was plenty of great food, and definitely it was a fun night. And tear it up is definitely that's on the agenda.
All righty, good deal. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for taking this time. You've been very generous with the time, and I feel like we barely scratched the surface, but I hope that I can do my part in helping move a few more books that will actually get read. Selling the book's one thing, but it does nobody any good if the book's not read. And I hope people read it closely and intensely, and I hope it changed the minds and hearts about the story that has been maligned over 6 decades, And so it's I think it'll be done one person at a time, but it'll be done. So
thank you.
I'll send you the link when this post and send it to you and Marshall. And like you said, let's stay in touch. I want to hear how this thing rolls, and maybe we'll do a follow-up or something. Okay.
Sure. And I think that you mentioned, I think on the Saturday night, August 9th, there's going to be a screening of the documentary and a book signing, a Q&A about the book and a book signing at the Los Feliz 3. That's in Los Feliz, California. And that's Saturday, I think at 6 p.m. They're going to make an announcement, but, and that's really, it's great. And I never wanted to ever refer to the night of August, because it really was Friday night, August 8th. But they say that it probably happened after midnight, so they always say August 9th. But it was the night of Friday, Friday night, August 8th. So, but the screening will be Saturday afternoon, I think at 6 p.m., August 9th. So this would be to the 56th year, to the date and the day that the murders are. So, and that, we did a screening. We had the misfortune of releasing the documentary at film festivals 1 week before COVID, and we only had one screening, and everything was canceled. We lost all our theatrical screenings. We lost everything. No one was, and so that was devastating, and it came at a cost. But then we did a screening in Las Vegas on October 10th, which I think would have been Jay's 86th birthday of 2019. I'm not sure, but. So these are auspicious dates. August 9th, not so much because of what happened on that date, but in the full circle of his story in the book, in the documentary, to me, it's a little bit of what you just said earlier today, restoring the proper status and legacy of Jay Sebring. And that not because he was killed on that date, but we're telling his story now.
Right.
56 years later. So.
Well, I want to mention, too, that I would love for you to relay a message to your mom that I hope this is a big step in healing after all these years. I think she did a tremendous job in the documentary, as well as how she's quoted in the book. I don't know her, obviously, but I think the world of her just by those two mediums of storytelling there. And I hope this helps her a lot. That's the main thing there too, because that's her brother, man. I'm a brother to my sister, and I would like to think that if something like that happened to me, somebody would be telling the story and straightening it up and get the truth out, and that it would help my sister if that had happened. So I wish that for your mom. And like I said, you and I are going to be staying in touch, and you and Marshall and we'll let Marshall pay for the dinner. But we'll go and we'll have a long talk, man.
Well, I was going to say, we if it's a Sunday, we can start with brunch, and it'll extend all the way through dinner, and then he'll cover that. I'm thinking
that's right. Especially if it's Mexican food, we can make that happen, right? So
I love Mexican food, but I'm going to lobby for Italian or maybe maybe football season. No, I'm joking.
Go to a Cardinals game while we're there or something, right? So
exactly. No, go to a sports bar. We have brunch, eggs, and nachos and all kinds of crap, and then whatever drinks, and then we go into dinner.
You're making me hungry, man. I'm gonna go grab a bite. So
yeah, absolutely,
well, Anthony, this is great, man. I love it, and let's stay in touch, okay?
I look forward to it, Randy, and the pleasure was mine. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
This has been another fun-filled episode of Boomerocity with your host and producer, Randy Patterson. The theme song is Roll the Dice and is recorded and used by permission from Quentin Hope. Quentin is spelled Quinten, and Hope is Hope. And you can find out more about Quentin at quentinhope.com. Post-production is done by Cardinal Sins Productions. The Boomerocity name, logo, and content is copyright protected. Segments may only be used with written permission by Boomerocity and/or its assignees. Inquiries should be directed to input@boomerocity.com. Copyright 2025.